I lead off with a question just because they're usually shy. Sometimes
I mean, the topics are not that. You can just have a feeling to avoid.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not the most beloved topics, of course not.
Yeah,
Fact, fiction, propaganda. Oui.
that's my theme.
That's
Student did the poster. We always have a poster contest.
yeah. It's good.
One of the better ones, I think.
Is there genocide studies as a kind of academic subject? Not yet.
They get, there's a course on World War II. There's general courses where they're mentioned.
But not comparative issues, not at all. It's a pity.
It's
Underdeveloped,
college.
underexplored.
College,
Yeah, you're right.
So
No, I mean in academia in general, it is.
No,
At the universities, they have comparative.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think they do. I hope they do. Okay, I think we're going to...
Yeah. I'll wait.
Hi, everybody. Hi, if you guys can just grab seats. We're going to get started just because we have another talk right after this one, and I really don't want to take time away from that one for this one. So we're going to get going. Just as a reminder, there's no eating or drinking in the auditorium. If you have cell phones, please turn them off so that we don't hear them vibrating or binging or whatever. And I'll introduce our speaker. Our speaker is Dr. Olaf Glockner. Dr. Glockner and I met in November when I was fortunate enough to go to Berlin. And he is here from the Moses Mendelssohn Center at the University of Potsdam. They are a famed European Jewish Studies department there. And so I'd like to welcome him to Montreal and to hear him. He will be speaking on right-wing populism and anti-Semitism in Europe today. And he's been studying this topic for quite a while. So I'd like to welcome him, Dr. Olaf Glockner.
Dankeschön. Thank you.
I'm going to go clean up and I'll come back.
Okay. Sorry, I need for the PowerPoint. Just. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks very much for having the opportunity today to speak here on this really complicated topic, anti-Semitism in Europe, a new unexpected challenge. Why is it so complicated? Europe is the continent with the longest history of relations between Jews and non-Jews, about 1,000 years, but also the most tragic one due to anti-Semitism and Judeophobia. The former Russian medical doctor Leon Pinsker, who lived in Odessa, himself a Jew, he has called anti-Semitism a collective psychiatric disease, and I think he is not that wrong. Anti-Semitism obviously does not depend on education or specific political views and constellations, and it is not explainable with rational arguments. Anti-Semitism is, as the Berlin historian Wolfgang Benz defines it, the generic term for all kinds of hostility against Jews because they are Jews and they are perceived as a coherent group. And one of its features is anti-Jewish hateful propaganda across the centuries. Lots of books and pamphlets have been circulating across Europe since the 19th century, trying to personify Jews as the pure evil, as a danger for each nation, and moreover as a danger just for human mankind. All thinkable forms of accusations have spread around long before Adolf Hitler and the Nazis came to power in Germany. Jews were accused for having been the murderers of Jesus Christ. Jews were accused for poisoning water, for killing Christian babies, for betraying with money, and for being infamous capitalists and Bolshevists almost at the same time. At any point of time, Jews were also accused that they want to control economy, finance, media, and finally the whole world. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion is such a book claiming that Jews have a plan to control all over the world. And this book has become a bestseller around the globe, not only in Europe. When Adolf Hitler came to power in Germany in 1933, he could perfectly tie on such dark conspiracy theories. In his programmatic book, Mein Kampf, My Fight, published already in 1925, Hitler wrote on how to deal with the Jews, what he expected to do with Jews when he would get in power. He wrote, "No people will remove this fist of the adamant world Jew from its throat other than by using the sword. Such an action, however, will be a bloody one." Many Germans were ready to follow Adolf Hitler in his plans and ideas more or less unconditionally. Admittedly, many Germans, many Europeans would not have believed that Hitler and the Germans would go so far to develop a complete plan of extermination against the European Jews. But this was exactly what happened between 1941 and 1945. Until the end of World War II, 6 million of 9 million European Jews had lost their lives. The death camp of Auschwitz, where more than 1 million people had been killed, became the synonym of Europe's biggest disaster in the 20th century. And nobody, really nobody, had stopped Hitler and his allies. After World War II, it was a big question whether anti-Semitism in Europe would have been finished for all, or whether it could come back and make trouble again. Step by step, at least parts of the European populace began to realize that they had not only ignored a genocide, but also lost an immense potential of academics, artists, intellectuals, civic right fighters, and entrepreneurs, all of them proud Europeans and patriots of their own countries. Now a new kind of politics of commemoration took shape, primarily in Western Europe, and at least anti-Semitism in the public arena became banned. However, today we face a situation in Europe where die-hard neo-Nazis can still claim that Jews are responsible for so many dilemmas and hardships in the world, sometimes even claiming that Jews would still grab for power over the whole world. Neo-Nazis might easily join ranks with Islamist groups, with radical Islamist groups, also claiming that Jews try to get control again over media, economy, political power, territory, and so on. Both groups, both radical groups, neo-Nazis and radical Islamists, share the aim to fight Jews wherever they can. For them, it remains an imaginary life or death struggle for ideological and also for religious reasons. The political left in Europe does not share this insanity, but this does not mean that the left cannot have strong anti-Semitic tendencies too. On the contrary, it is especially the left who condemns the state of Israel as the biggest obstacle for any peace in the Middle East, and which supports global initiatives to boycott Israel in all spheres of political and social life, economy, culture, academia, and so on. Finally, we have very strong right-wing populist parties in Europe today, which usually do not join the trendy hostility against Israel and sometimes even solidarize with the state of Israel, On the other hand, right-wing populists demand the prohibition of ritual slaughter, the Hebrew word is shechita, and sometimes also the prohibition of circumcision. And by demanding these two things, they just attack Jew minorities with one and the same means, attacking the Muslim and the Jewish religious population. So that are the most significant forms of Jew hatred and anti-Semitism in Europe today, and sometimes, again, with deadly outcomes. As it seems, terrorist attacks have become a specific problem in some countries of Western Europe today. And here we speak about such modern countries, like Belgium, France, and even also Denmark. In France, terrorist attacks have already caused lots of Jewish victims again. Sometimes the terrorists just act against the population in general, trying to kill as much people as possible. Sometimes they are making no difference between Jews and non-Jews. Sometimes, however, the targets of the terrorists are distinctly Jewish places, like a Jewish kindergarten in Toulouse and the kosher supermarket Hyper Cacher in Paris in 2016. And the victims of Call have individual faces. For example, the medical doctor Sarah Halimi, who was stabbed to death, and also the Holocaust survivor Mireille Knoll, who was stabbed to death in March of last year. In a suburb of Paris, the shield on the bottom right, in a suburb of Paris, this shield remembers on the young man Ilan Halimi. He is not a relative of Sarah Halimi, he's a distinct person. In summer 2006, a whole gang of young Muslims and North Africans tortured Ilan Halimi over 3 weeks, trying to press money from him, his relatives, or his friends, or just from any Jews or Jewish communities, because in the eyes of the perpetrators, Jews must have lots of money. All these mentioned attacks have been conducted by more or less, all these mentioned attacks I have mentioned now, they have been conducted by more or less criminal, frustrated, often militant and extremely brutal Jew haters. On the other hand, we find well-organized radical Islamist groups and networks across Europe which provide the religious and ideological justification to fight or even to kill Jews in our days. It is difficult to get a clear picture where purely religious fanaticism ends and where distinct anti-Semitism begins. However, alone in Germany, 29 Islamist organizations are currently monitored with more than 37,000 supporters. According to the Federal Office for the Protection of the Constitution, the German Secret Service, for all these groups, anti-Semitism is a constitutive component of their ideology. Radical Islamists have also been involved in the huge anti-Israeli demonstrations across Europe in big cities like London, Brussels, Madrid, Paris, Berlin. In summer 2014, when the war between Israel and Hamas-ruled Gaza Strip had escalated once more. It makes sense, I think, just to stay for a moment and to watch and read the slogans and banners for the formerly political activists here that you can see in the picture. Unfortunately, this is in German language, but I will translate. Up left, you find the transparent child murderer Israel, German words Kindermörder Israel, and down on the right you find the slogan Free Palestine, stop the Jewish terror. The message, I think, is clear. Israel is considered as a country where the Jews are eager to kill little Palestinian boys and girls, and Jews inside and outside Israel are made responsible for all kinds of military and security attacks which are described as the Jewish terror. In the middle of the bottom, you see a young man wearing a Palestinian keffiyeh and holding a shield that combines the colors of the Israeli national flag, blue and white, with the Nazi German swastika. Also, the far right in Europe has never stopped to instrumentalize the Israeli-Palestinian conflict for trying to show how brutal and expansionist Jews would act if they get power in their hands. Their so-called solidarization with Palestine or other Arab states and groups in the Middle East is, of course, artificial and an obvious means to an end. Both groups, radical Islamists and right-wing extremists, are conducting arson attacks against synagogues in several countries of Germany, whereas the frequency of such attacks significantly differ from country to country. For example, in France, we have attacks against synagogues all the time, each month. And sometimes they are even different. Germany is less cases of arson attacks, but this is the city of Worms in 2010. This is a German example. Again, even in Sweden we find Jewish communities only in 3 cities. They are Stockholm, Gothenburg and Malmö. And in Malmö, especially in its most problematic quarter called Rosengård, Jewish institutions are under regular attack and threat all the time. The synagogue was attacked and other places too. Everybody who is visible as Jew in Rosengård lives dangerous. That is a fact. Since they are permanently harassed and accosted, many of the Malmö Jews have left the city and moved to any other places in Sweden, for example to Stockholm or to Gothenburg. Several suburbs in French metropolitan towns have exactly the same problem, but the Malmö case, in my view, is especially shocking because Sweden is in general considered the heartland of liberalism and tolerance in Europe. Regarding France, each year, thousands of Jews now leave the country. They go to Israel, they go to America, and they go anywhere because they don't feel safe anymore. So we have seen that at least 3 strong political and cultural forces can seriously impede Jewish life in Europe: radical Islamists, left-wing radicals, and right-wing extremists, or let's say neo-Nazis. Things become even more complicated when we come to the so-called right-wing populist movements and parties in Europe, who have become stronger and stronger in recent years. Here again, I want to illustrate the problem by the most debated current German example, the new surprisingly successful party AfD, Alternative for Germany. Originally, the AfD was founded in 2013 as an Europe-skeptical and right-wing liberal party. They cared much more for economical problems, but now it has turned and they have become much more nationalistic and revisionist. When we had the election campaign for the Bundestag, for the German parliament in the fall of 2017, at least 2 of their top leaders of the AfD, Björn Höcke and Alexander Gauland, openly challenged the previous self-critical debates on Germany's Nazi past and all the crimes which have been done in this period of Adolf Hitler and the Nazis. The Holocaust, the genocide at the Sinti and Roma, euthanasia, war crimes against civic populations in Eastern Europe, and much more. Now, in 2017, the AfD politician Björn Höcke argued, we need nothing else than a 180-degree change in the politics of commemoration. And Alexander Gauland himself, the head of the AfD party, provoked and shocked the public nearly at the same time when he underlined, "We have the right to be proud on achievements of German soldiers in both world wars." Björn Höcke didn't go into detail what he has meant with a 180-degree change in the politics of commemoration. And Alexander Gauland did also not explain what kind of awesome German soldiers' achievements in World War I and World War II he would like to celebrate. However, I think both statements give us an impression what kind of mindset right-wing populists want to cultivate in Germany now. They seem to be willing, or they are ready, to relativize or even to deny the Nazi crimes in World War II, and thus also to humiliate the victims of the Nazis and of Nazi Germany. At the same time, at least parts of the AfD produced cheap propaganda against Muslims and Jewish religious rituals like circumcision and ritual slaughter I had already mentioned, allegedly caring for the well-being of infants and animals. Another thing that concerns the Jewish and non-Jewish world in Germany is the question whether general anti-Semitic attitudes and stereotypes have infected the social middle class in Europe. The well-known Berlin professor of linguistics, Monika Schwarz-Friesel, predicates exactly this. Schwarz-Friesel has analyzed a lot of thousands of emails which have been written by non-Jews, either to the Central Council of Jews in Germany or to the Israeli embassy in Berlin. And she made a big book after analyzing all these email letters, and the results are also indeed shocking. Schwarz-Friesel and her team figured out a considerable number of highly educated email senders, clearly using anti-Semitic stereotypes, but considering themselves to be right after all. Very often they accused Israel for making the world more worse, but sometimes similar accusations were brought just against the Jews as a group. And here you see a few tasters of such formulations in emails to the Central Council of Jews in Germany and to the Israeli embassy. Get out of Germany, get out of Gaza, get out of this world, get out of the universe. Hitler obviously knew why he wanted to eradicate you. We know exactly what you want, you Jews. You want to control and rule the world. The banking crisis is your work. Here, the banking crisis of 2008 is meant. And the interesting thing is, lots of email senders, they gave their whole signature. They are not afraid to show from where they will write their emails with the full addresses, with their full professions, and a lot of them also highly educated people. So at any point, it has become clear now that Europe is almost 80 years after the Shoah not really healed from the disease, from the collective psychiatric disease of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is not so expressive in the public anymore, of course. It is officially banned, but it is present, and it is causing a lot of uncertainty among the Jews on the continent themselves. This was definitely one of the reasons why the European Agency for Fundamental Rights, in short the FRA, has initiated two huge surveys among the Jewish population inside the European Union, one in 2012 and one in 2018. I think this is a positive aspect. The European Union politicians, they became aware of the problems, so they organized these huge surveys. The survey in 2018 has become the biggest survey among a Jewish population group worldwide, and they tried to find out how are Jews feeling in this new situation with an increasing anti-Semitism. The survey was conducted in 14 EU member states: Austria, Belgium, Germany, Denmark, Spain, France, Hungary, Italy, Latvia, Netherlands, Poland, Sweden, and the United Kingdom. In the survey in 2012, we had only 7 states under focus, and the coordination for both surveys was done by the Institute of Jewish Policy Research in London. So let's look for some results. 89% of the Jewish respondents, it came out that 89% of the Jewish respondents had the feeling that anti-Semitism has increased in their country within the recent 5 years. 85% of the respondents consider anti-Semitism in their country as a serious problem, and they perceive anti-Semitism mainly in the internet and the social networks, in public places, and in political life. What does such a situation mean for the European Jews on their individual level? 28% of all respondents have experienced anti-Semitic harassment at least once during recent 12 months before the survey. 20% of all respondents know family members or other close people to them who were verbally insulted, harassed, or even physically attacked. 54% of the respondents positively assessed their national government's efforts to protect Jewish communities and Jewish population, but 70% also believe that the government in their country does not combat anti-Semitism effectively enough. Both surveys in 2012 and also in 2018 also confirmed that the anti-Semitic offenders have come from very different camps and milieus. Here in 2018 we had offenders perceived by the concerned Jews who had any kind of, who experienced any kind of anti-Semitic incident. They perceived radical Muslims or Islamists 31%, left-wing extremists and 21%, and right-wing extremists 13%. These figures are especially related to anti-Semitic harassment. However, it means we have a new situation in the countries of Europe compared with 80 or 100 years ago. Strong anti-Semitism is not only coming from the far right or from racists, but also from the far left, and especially in Western Europe, radicalized Muslim and Islamists are currently perceived as the biggest threat for the Jewish population there. Actually, we can see it as at the example of France. It is even not clear whether the state and the security forces will keep control in the long run. Such a complicated situation makes the Jews of Europe, of course, to think about their own safety, their future, also the future of their children and grandchildren, and about strategies to avoid a direct confrontation with anti-Semitism or just to decide to combat it, openly to combat it. This was also a topic of the online questionnaire which we had used for this survey, and the appropriate answers have been shocking again. So as it seems right now, a considerable part of Europe's Jews nowadays either think on emigration from distinct EU member states, as for example from France, people go out, or they just decide for a strategy which I would call an inner migration. That means avoiding to stand out as Jews, avoiding Jewish places, at least sometimes, and avoiding places and quarters which are considered as not really safe for Jews, more or less just becoming invisible. However, thanks God, there is also a considerable number of Jews and also of non-Jewish sympathizers and friends who are not willing to accept such a strange and menacing situation in the modern Europe of today, especially in the European Union with its exigent human rights agenda. Some leading European politicians have openly declared that they will never tolerate any kind of Jew hatred, no matter from which political, religious, cultural, ethnic camp, however it would come. For example, the former French Prime Minister Manuel Valls, he gave such strong statements that they will never tolerate these kind of anti-Semitism, and they will fight it wherever they will meet it. But in fact, this is a very huge and difficult challenge now, considering that anti-Semitism is actively pursued by several groups, as I have mentioned, and that politicians and the public and the media, all these important parts of society, for a long time they have undervalued the problem. The coming years will show whether the problem of anti-Semitism and Judeophobia can really be overcome in the long run, and whether Jews in Europe will remain to trust into their mainly non-Jewish surroundings. If not, a disastrous new Jewish exodus from Europe could be the outcome. Thank you. Questions? Yes, here's the first question. Sorry? Sorry, I didn't. It was too. 70% of Jews feel like that nothing is being No, 70% of Jews feel that their governments are not fighting effectively enough against the problem of anti-Semitism. 54% of the Jews who were asked in the survey said, yes, my government is trying to help. They try to protect the Jewish communities. I think it's important to explain that Jews in Europe today, it's a very, very small portion of the population. As I told, at the beginning of World War II, 9 million Jews lived in Europe, and 6 million European Jews lost their lives in the Holocaust. So at the end of World War II, 3 million Jews were living on this continent. But now the number of Jews who are at least registered as Jewish community members, the number is about 1.5 million. So the number decreased again and again and again. And such kind of small communities, it's clear that they, if they get some kind of threat and there's a danger to be attacked, they feel especially unprotected. So 54% of them said in the survey, yes, we respect and we see our governments are trying something to protect us, but 70% said we think it's not enough or it's not effectively enough. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Could you comment, if you will, on the political or social conditions that are encouraging this resurgence in anti-Semitism? Are there certain factors that you think that are contributing?
I think it's different. It's different because I mainly spoke about Western Europe right now, and countries like Belgium, Denmark, and France, especially France, they have a problem with terrorism terrorist attacks against Jewish communities. This is less the case, for example, in Eastern Europe, and in some cities where extremist terrorist attacks happened against Jewish communities, you find a special milieu of underprivileged groups of non-integrated immigrants, many of them radicalized Islamists. So this is one huge problem, but in Eastern Europe you have different problems. For example, political anti-Semitism is very strong in a country like Hungary. In Hungary it's possible that right-wing or right-radical party like Jobbik, they just demand in the parliament, they say, we should design a list of Jewish deputies in the parliament, and they justify it. They just said, we think we are convinced that Jews in our Hungarian parliament are less loyal to the Hungarian states than to the state of Israel. So let's make a list of them. Let's control it. In other countries, for example, in the German parliament or in the British parliament, it would be completely impossible. So it's not terrorism, but it makes the Jews in Hungary in a different way uncertain. Yeah.
Is there any other questions?
So you talked about the war in Gaza and in
Yes,
Palestine.
yes.
So is being against the genocide that happened against Palestinian anti-Semitic?
Mm-hmm.
Like if I have different political ideas or I'm just not okay with what's happening right now in Gaza and what Israelis are doing, does that make me anti-Semitic?
I think we should define what is a genocide. A genocide,
Murder.
for example, like the Holocaust at the European Jews, there was a clear intention, a systematically plan just to exterminate a complete population group just because they are the others. So
Okay,
it was from the very beginning.
How is that different from what's happening in Palestine?
What happens between Israel and Palestine is a political conflict which is conducted by violent means from both sides, but there's no intention just to exterminate a complete population group. Where do you see the intention from any side to kill completely another hostile group or whatever, a group which I don't like, just to annihilate them? Where do you see it? I mean, it's a very tragic, very violent, very complicated conflict. It's about 100 years, but I would strictly reject to call this a kind of genocide. They have to find solutions. Both sides have to find solutions. Both sides are using violent means, and it is a kind of asymmetric conflict. From the military side, Israel is much stronger, and Israel sometimes is using this kind of military means. And I know when the conflict escalates, like in summer 2014, you have in the outcome you have a greater number of civic victims on the Palestinian side, and this is an awful thing. That's a tragic thing. And it needs a solution. The conflict needs a solution, but you cannot call this a genocide where one side is just planning to systematically annihilate the other group. Adolf Hitler they had a plan. They started at the Wannsee Conference in 1941. They said, okay, we are going with our military forces to Eastern Europe. So many Jews, we want to get rid of them, we will kill them. So, and they did. They did in special camps in an industrial way.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation and for everything you're sharing with us today. It's really appreciated. I hope, where's the student that asked the question? I don't know your name. I just want to come back to her question, and I think that, if I may, and if I'm misrepresenting, you'll let me know, okay? I just wanted to say, I understand absolutely your commentary regarding genocide, and it's very well, it needed to be said, right? The intent, etc., and absolutely. But if we can come back to the question, is a situation where one would be against political decision-making in Israel, would that, I think your question is, if I'm against the political decision-making taking place in Israel, does that make one anti-Semitic? Like, where would you stand on that particular question if we take genocide out of the, and I understand why you highlighted it, if we take the word genocide out of the picture, is that disagreement with the policies of the Israeli government, does that disagreement with that, or standing against that, make one anti-Semitic? And I
Yeah, you mean, is critics on Israel anti-Semitic? Yeah, okay, so sorry that I misunderstand you. I think it depends on the topic itself, what you criticize. So if you criticize Israel to hold territory, which is according to the United Nations plan of a two-state solution, holding these territories is to criticize it. This is not anti-Semitic. Of course it is not anti-Semitic. But if you, as I showed in one of the pictures of these demonstrations, if you just calling demand stop the Jewish terror. What is the Jewish terror? And stop Israeli terror. You can just we can discuss about military means, but Jews across the world, there are lots of Jews inside Israel who are the most distinct, most sharply critical of Israel itself. There are Jewish academians who just call for boycott of their own universities. I mean, if this makes sense or not, this is a different question. If you see other countries which are distinct war crimes, and nobody is discussing about boycotting any kinds of states like North Korea. They have a third of their population is in camps. So nobody is just sharply criticizing China, who holds Tibet since 80 years or more. So no, it depends on the topic, but politically criticizing Israel is not anti-Semitic. No, why? So also not critics on, let's bring a different example. You know that Russia occupied the Crimea in the year 2014, and the whole world is just was angry and said, how can you occupy it? It's the first time after World War II that a European or half European nation, an empire, goes with their troops and is just occupying a part of a neighbor country. Everybody is against it, and they do there are a lot of demonstrations even in front of the Russian embassy in Berlin. Ukrainians and other people are demonstrating there, but nobody would start the idea to say all these demonstrators are Russophobians. It's not.
Does that answer your question? Is that good? Okay, anybody else have any other questions? Oh, sorry, didn't see you.
Right-wing populists
Yes.
have come up with the idea that there needs to be a 180-degree turn in terms of what exactly?
Yeah, that's a good question. This is an example from Germany, and this guy, Björn Höcke, he's one of the leading politicians of the alternative of Germany, AfD. He didn't explain. He didn't explain, and that is the thing, if you say we need 180-degree change in politics in considering history. So in a logical way, it would mean Hitler was right. Hitler did a lot of good things, and Germany has to consider its history in completely different way. But this guy, this is the clear difference to a neo-Nazi, or to a right radical would say that's not true. Hitler didn't kill Jews, and Hitler didn't conduct war crimes or something like this. This right-wing populist, he is, in a certain way, he is protecting himself, because he says, we need a great change, we have to consider our history much more different right now. We have to emphasize what the other guy said, Alexander Gauland. He said we should have the right to be proud on the achievements of our soldiers in World War I and World War II. But Gauland, he's also, this is typical attitude and strategy of right-wing populists. He's not explaining what he means. And in a public discussion, I would like to ask him, where should Germans of today be proud on the German Wehrmacht in World War II? Should they be proud on that the German Wehrmacht was guarding the place at the place of Babi Yar near Kiev, where the Germans killed in the fall of 1941 30,000 Jewish civilians in 2 days? So is this a reason to be proud on the soldiers or the German Wehrmacht? Another example is the Polish capital, Warsaw. Warsaw had 2 uprisings during the time of Nazi occupation. The first uprising was a Jewish uprising in the Jewish ghetto in spring of 1943, and with a tragic outcome, and almost all of the Jewish fighters were killed. They had the choice between getting deported to the death camps more in the east, or just to fight and to die in the fight against the Nazi Wehrmacht. But 1 year later, more than 1 year later, in August in 1944, the Russian army, the Soviet army was already near Warsaw, and then the whole city was just taking an uprising. And once more, the German Wehrmacht was succeeding to bring them down. But if you see pictures of the city of Warsaw, there was almost not one house still there. You see only brackets. You see only it's just a completely destroyed city. And so I cannot understand this man. But what the general trend is, you see it in cities like in states like Poland, for example, or in Hungary. There are strong forces, politicians, also intellectuals. Not all of them, of course, historians, journalists, they would like to emphasize the suffering, having been victims in different wars, and showing the great leaders just to make the picture of the own role in different wars and conflicts, to improve the own image. This is a very typical trend for right-wing populists, and the Germans made it up in the last 3 or 4 years. In some other countries, like Hungary and Poland, you have it already for a longer time. Is it?
Any other questions? Any other questions? Anybody have any questions?
I have a question
Yes.
for you now.
Yeah,
And my
thank you.
question is, this whole issue of right-wing populism, we've been talking about it for a while, and the rise of right-wing populism across the globe actually
Yes.
is a resurgence that's quite unnerving, to say the least. And I'm very aware of language of division that can really, even when it's coming from a good place, can sort of reinforce that kind of position. So my question to you is, how do we address the issue of right-wing populism? How can we work towards fighting it, but in a way that is less divisive? I'm not sure what the answer is, and so I'm turning the question to you. How do we address it, and how do we stop that surge, frankly?
I think it's very wide, very bright question. I think it's 2 things. I would speak once more with regard to Germany, because these kind of AfD alternative for Germany, they try 2 things. It's a historical revisionism, and of course the only opportunity to face them and to resist them is to spread more historical facts, and to tell them that there is not much in the years between 1933 and 45. There is nothing to be proud of. And so I would say more details in history, in modern history. And with the Hungarians, it's, I don't know for Canada. I don't know Canada much enough, but I stay in Europe with the Hungarians. The Hungarians, when Hitler occupied almost the whole Eastern Europe before he attacked the Soviet Union, some of the Eastern European states, they took immediately side of Hitler, and Hungary was one of them. Hungarian forces were fighting also against the Soviet Union. And when they realized, the war luck is turning, they suddenly in 1933 or 44, they tried to step out from the coalition with Hitler and said, now we want to become neutral. We want to be a neutral state. The Italians, for example, did exactly the same. And then the German Wehrmacht forces, they have been still so strong as military forces. They occupied Italy to prevent that they get a neutral state, and they occupied Hungary. And in Hungary, it happened very late. It happened in the March of 1944. And I was in Budapest now a couple of weeks ago, and I discovered there they have a new memorial. They have different memorials. They still have a memorial for the Soviet army liberating Budapest at the beginning of 45, and they have a memorial of Ronald Reagan calling "Tear down the wall" and all these things. But now they have also a memorial which is remembering the German occupation of Hungary in March 44. just describing it in a way that we have been the victims. Nothing happened before. We were the victims. Anytime Germany came from the sky and occupied our country, but they suppressed the fact, this memorial is suppressing the fact that the Hungarians were on German side for 2 or 3 years before. So such kinds of details, each country for themselves have just to make more clear on these details. And the other thing, I think the even more dangerous thing is that right-wing populists tend to discredit, to stigmatize minorities. For example, in Germany, in the election campaign in Germany in 2017, they also had kind of posters. We like only German cuisine. We don't want this Muslim food. We don't want this Jewish food. They didn't write it in the, but they symbolized it. We won't have only German cuisine. So, and in one of the cities in my home region, a couple of weeks later on, there were attacks on restaurants, on the Jewish restaurants, on a Persian restaurant. So this, you cannot make a clear connection between this, but if right-wing populists start to describe a minority as the distinct, strange, they are not belonging to us. So this is the more dangerous thing, and they tried also with the on the religious point, and this AfD, Alternative for Germany, I think they don't have it now in their political program, but they were discussing it. They said, we want to prohibit in Germany, we want to prohibit religious circumcision of boys, and we want to prohibit the ritual slaughter of animals, just the shechita. You can discuss it in a way. You can discuss it. Is this good for the birds? Is this good for the animals? Why not? Why shouldn't there be a cultural discussion about the issue? But if a political party says we wanna forbid it, and they even went so far, the AfD, they went so far. They said we want to forbid the import of kosher meat or halal meat, which is ritually slaughtered. In this way, you forbid it inside your country, you forbid the import of this meat, then it is completely clear the intention is we don't want these minorities, these religious minorities, we don't want religious Muslims in Germany, we don't want religious Jews in Germany. But again, the dangerous thing is they would never say it in an open way, but you have to uncover what is behind. So, and this is, you can do it in schools, you can do it in the public arena, you can, the media, I think it's also very important that mainstream media and that they are aware what's going on, and to prevent that the climate against these minorities become more and more worse.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? No?
No.
Well, I'm going to ask one more time and then you can clap. Anybody have any more questions? Okay, now you can clap. Thank you, Olaf.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.